I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you personally for all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
Kate's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she tore open the mysterious envelope. The DNA results inside revealed a secret so shocking, so unthinkable, that she collapsed in tears. Diana had hidden something that could destroy the royal family forever.
But I just wanted to make a few opening remarks, if I may this morning.
When Kate finally understood what the test proved, she knew her life would never be the same. What she discovered about Diana's past was more explosive than anyone could have imagined. The morning began like any other at Kensington Palace. Staff members moved through the corridors with their usual efficiency. Breakfast was served in the private dining room, and the children's voices could be heard echoing from the upper floors. Kate Middleton sat at her desk, sorting through the day's correspondence with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years navigating royal protocol. Among the letters, invitations, and official documents lay a single white envelope that would change everything. There was nothing immediately remarkable about it. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for her name written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. No official crest adorned the seal. No return address indicated its origin. Kate picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The weight of it felt different somehow, heavier than it should have been for something so simple. She hesitated for a moment, her instincts telling her that whatever lay inside was not meant for casual reading. Still, curiosity won out. She tore open the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letterhead at the top identified it as coming from a private laboratory. The words "Confidential DNA Report" were printed in bold at the center of the page. Kate's breath caught in her throat as her eyes scanned downward, taking in the technical language and scientific terminology that filled the document. But it was the names that made her freeze. Names she recognized immediately. Names that should never have appeared together in this context. Her late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, was listed alongside another name that Kate barely knew but would never forget after this moment. The conclusion of the report was written in clear, clinical language that left no room for misinterpretation. According to the DNA analysis, there was a biological connection between Diana and this other person, a connection that palace officials had spent decades denying. Kate read the words again, then a third time, hoping she had misunderstood. But the science was unambiguous. The implications were staggering. What she held in her trembling hands was not just a piece of paper. It was evidence of a secret so explosive that it threatened to unravel the very foundation of the British monarchy. Her mind raced as she tried to process what this meant. The whispers she had heard over the years, the rumors that circulated in certain circles about Diana's life outside the palace walls, suddenly took on new significance. Kate had always dismissed such talk as tabloid nonsense, the kind of cruel speculation that followed every member of the royal family. But here was proof that some of those whispers had been based on truth. Someone had gone to great lengths to obtain this information, and even greater lengths to ensure it reached her hands. Kate stood up from her desk, the report still clutched in her hand. Through the window, she could see the palace gardens stretching out in their manicured perfection, a symbol of the order and tradition that defined royal life. But inside her chest, her heart pounded with a chaos that threatened to overwhelm her. She thought about her children playing somewhere in the vast palace, innocent and unaware of the storm that was gathering. She thought about William, who would need to know about this. And she thought about Diana, whose shadow had always loomed large over the family, even decades after her death. The timing could not have been worse. Kate's relationship with King Charles had been strained for months. Disagreements over her public duties and the direction of her charitable work had created tension between them. There had been arguments, carefully worded but sharp nonetheless, about the proper role of the Princess of Wales. Charles had specific expectations about how Kate should conduct herself, what causes she should champion, and how visible she should be. Kate had pushed back, insisting on maintaining some autonomy in her public life. Now, holding this report, she wondered if those conflicts had been about something else entirely. Had Charles known about this secret all along? Was his need to control her image rooted in fear that she might discover what Diana had hidden? She sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Her eyes returned to the document, reading the technical details that confirm the biological relationship. The laboratory that had conducted the test was legitimate, according to the letterhead. The methodology appeared sound. This was not some amateur attempt at creating scandal. Someone with resources and determination had commissioned this analysis and made sure the results found their way to her. Kate's thoughts turned to Diana's final years, the period before her death when she had seemed increasingly isolated and afraid. There had been interviews where Diana spoke cryptically about secrets she could not reveal, about forces working against her. At the time, many had attributed these statements to paranoia or emotional distress. But what if Diana had been trying to tell the truth? What if she had known that revealing certain information would put her in danger, yet felt compelled to leave clues for those who came after her? The Princess of Wales had famously said there were 3 people in her marriage, referring to Camilla's presence in Charles's life. But perhaps there had been other secrets, other complications that the public never learned about. Diana had maintained friendships and connections outside the royal circle, relationships that raised eyebrows among palace officials. She had traveled extensively, met with people from all walks of life, and carved out a space for herself that existed somewhat independent of royal constraints. During those years of separation from Charles, before the divorce was finalized, Diana had lived a life that was only partially visible to the public eye. Kate wiped at her cheeks and realized she was crying. The tears had come without her noticing, streaming down her face as the full weight of the discovery settled over her. This was not just about Diana anymore. This was about the entire institution of the monarchy, about the lies that had been told, and the truths that had been suppressed. If the information in this report became public, it would trigger a crisis unlike anything the royal family had faced in modern times. Questions would be asked about who knew what and when they knew it. The carefully maintained image of the monarchy as a stable, honorable institution would be shattered. But beyond the institutional implications, Kate felt a deep personal connection to this revelation. She had married into this family with her eyes open, aware of the pressures and expectations that came with royal life. Yet she had also believed in certain fundamental truths about the people around her. Now those truths were being called into question. If this secret had been kept hidden for so long, what other deceptions existed beneath the surface of royal life? Who could she trust with this information? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do with it? The report lay on her lap now, the paper slightly crumpled from her grip. Kate looked at it one more time, committing the details to memory. She knew that whatever decision she made in the coming hours and days would have consequences that rippled far beyond her own life. This was Diana's final secret, delivered to her across the years, like a message in a bottle. And Kate understood, with absolute clarity, that she could never pretend she had not received it. In the days following the discovery of the DNA report, Kate found herself unable to focus on anything else. The document remained hidden in her private study, locked away where no staff member could accidentally stumble upon it. But its contents burned in her mind, demanding answers to questions she had never thought to ask. She went through the motions of her daily responsibilities, attending engagements and meeting with charitable organizations. But her thoughts were elsewhere. She needed to understand the full story behind what she had read, and there was only one place where those answers might be found. Diana's family estate at Althorp had always held a special significance for the Spencer family. It was where Diana had grown up, where her memory was preserved with careful reverence, and where certain aspects of her life remained protected from public scrutiny. Kate had visited before, of course, for formal occasions and family gatherings, but this time would be different. She arranged for a private visit, telling William and the palace staff that she needed time for quiet reflection away from London. The excuse was plausible enough. Everyone knew that Kate occasionally sought solitude to recharge from the demanding pace of royal life. No one questioned her decision to spend a few days at Althorp. The estate appeared different when she arrived this time. Perhaps it was her state of mind, or perhaps the weight of what she now knew colored everything she saw. The sprawling grounds stretched out in every direction, beautiful but somehow melancholic. The house itself seemed to watch her as she approached, its windows like eyes that had witnessed decades of Spencer family history. Kate was greeted by the staff with their usual courtesy, and she settled into one of the guest rooms before beginning her real purpose for being there. She had arranged to meet with one of the elder housekeepers, a woman named Margaret, who had served the Spencer family for nearly 40 years. Margaret had been at Althorp during Diana's childhood and had remained loyal to the family through all the turbulent years that followed. If anyone knew about Diana's private papers and personal effects, it would be her. Kate found Margaret in one of the sitting rooms, and after some gentle conversation, she explained what she was looking for. She needed to see Diana's personal archive, the materials that had been kept private, away from the exhibitions and public displays. Margaret's expression shifted at the request. There was recognition there, as if she had been expecting this conversation eventually. Without many words, the elderly woman led Kate through a series of corridors that grew progressively narrower and less adorned. They passed rooms filled with family portraits and historical artifacts, moving deeper into the private sections of the estate. Finally, they stopped before a door that Kate had never noticed on previous visits. It was tucked away in a corner, easy to overlook unless you knew exactly where to look. Margaret produced a key from her pocket and unlocked the door, then stepped aside. She gave Kate a long, meaningful look before quietly walking away, leaving her alone with whatever lay beyond. Kate pushed the door open and felt a rush of cool air escape from inside. The room was small and windowless, lit only by the light filtering in from the hallway. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out shelves lining the walls, stacked with boxes and containers of various sizes. Most were labeled with dates or general descriptions, but 3 boxes in the far corner caught her attention immediately. These boxes were set apart from the others, bound with faded blue ribbons that had clearly been tied many years ago. On the top of the first box, written in handwriting Kate recognized from letters she had seen before, were the words, "For Catherine, when the time is right." Her hands shook as she reached for the box. Diana had left these specifically for her and had anticipated that someday Kate would come looking for answers. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Inside the first box were letters, dozens of them, written in Diana's distinctive hand. The pages showed signs of hurried composition, with crossed-out words and sentences that ran together as if Diana had been racing to get her thoughts down before they could be forgotten or suppressed. Kate began reading, and with each page, the story became clearer and more disturbing. Diana had been conducting her own investigation into aspects of her life that troubled her. She wrote about meetings she had arranged in secret, conversations she had recorded in her memory, because she dared not write them down at the time, and suspicions that had grown into certainties. The letters revealed a woman who felt trapped by circumstances beyond her control, who had discovered truths about her own life that others wanted kept hidden. Diana wrote about people she had met during her separation from Charles, relationships that had formed outside the suffocating confines of palace protocol. She mentioned a man repeatedly, someone whose name appeared again and again in her accounts of those years. The way Diana described him suggested a connection that went beyond casual friendship, though she was careful never to be completely explicit in her written words. Among the letters, Kate found photographs. They faded with age, the colors slightly washed out, but the images were clear enough. Diana appeared in several of them, looking younger and somehow freer than she had in her official portraits. And beside her, in multiple photographs, was a man Kate did not recognize. His features were striking, with a strong jawline and dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead. But it was his eyes that stopped Kate cold. There was something hauntingly familiar about them, a depth and intensity that she had seen before in someone else. She studied his face more carefully, comparing it mentally to the royal family members she knew so well. The resemblance hit her with sudden force. This man looked remarkably like Prince Harry, or rather, like what Harry might look like in another 20 years. The same basic bone structure, the same expression around the eyes. even the same slightly mischievous quality to his smile. Kate felt her stomach tighten as the implications became impossible to ignore. If this man and Harry shared these physical similarities, and if Diana had maintained a close relationship with him during the years of her marital breakdown, then the questions raised by the DNA report took on an entirely new dimension. Beneath the photographs and letters, Kate discovered another sealed envelope. This one was marked simply with the word DNA written across the front. Inside were documents from a laboratory, older than the report Kate had received, but similar in format. Diana had commissioned her own genetic testing and had sought scientific confirmation of what she suspected. The results were partial, not as comprehensive as modern testing could provide, but they pointed in a direction that was unmistakable. Diana had known. She had possessed evidence of a biological connection that the palace had denied existed. Kate sat back on her heels, surrounded by the scattered contents of Diana's hidden archive. The scope of what had been concealed became staggering. This was not just about one secret or one relationship. This was about a systematic effort to erase someone from history, to deny their existence and their connection to one of the most famous women in the world. Diana had fought against this erasure, had gathered evidence and documentation, hoping that someday it would matter. And she had left it all for Kate to find, trusting that the woman who married her son would have the courage to face the truth. More photographs emerged from the boxes, showing the mystery man at different ages and in various settings. In some, he appeared to be a young adult, perhaps in his early 20s. In others, he seemed older, more weathered by life. But the family resemblance remained constant, undeniable to anyone who looked closely. Kate found what appeared to be official documents as well, though many had been heavily redacted or partially destroyed. Birth records with names blacked out, hospital documents with missing pages, registration forms that raised more questions than they answered. It became clear that someone had worked very hard to eliminate this man from any official record. Entire chapters of his life had been erased, as if powerful forces had decided that his existence was inconvenient and had taken steps to make him disappear, at least on paper. But Diana had fought back in her own way, preserving what evidence she could, hiding it away where it might survive long enough to be discovered by someone who would know what to do with it. Kate spent hours in that small room, reading through everything Diana had left behind. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had stumbled upon a truth that terrified those in power, a truth that struck at the very heart of royal legitimacy and succession. Diana had tried to speak about it in coded ways, through carefully worded interviews and cryptic statements, but the machinery of the palace had worked against her, dismissing her claims as emotional instability or attention-seeking behavior. Now, years after her death, the evidence she had preserved told a different story entirely. As Kate finally gathered the materials and prepared to leave the archive room, she realized that her search had raised as many questions as it had answered. Who was this man really? Where was he now? And most importantly, what did he want from the family that had denied his existence for so long? The answers to these questions would determine not just Kate's next steps, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. Kate returned to London with a burden that grew heavier with each passing mile. The evidence she had gathered from Althorp sat locked in a secure case, but its contents weighed on her mind far more than any physical object could. She knew that what came next would be difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing she had ever done. But there was no turning back now. The truth demanded to be acknowledged, and that meant confronting the people who had worked hardest to keep it buried. She requested a private meeting with King Charles, using the formal channels that such requests required. The appointment was set for late afternoon in one of the smaller sitting rooms at Clarence House, away from the usual flow of staff and visitors. When Kate arrived, she found Charles already waiting, seated in his preferred chair with that familiar expression of mild impatience he wore when his schedule was disrupted. He greeted her with the careful politeness that had characterized their relationship in recent months, strained but maintaining the appearance of family harmony. Kate did not waste time with pleasantries. She placed the folder containing Diana's documents on the table between them and began to speak. She explained what she had found at Althorp, describing the letters and photographs that Diana had preserved. She watched Charles carefully as she spoke, looking for any sign of surprise or confusion. But his face remained remarkably composed, betraying nothing. It was only when she produced the DNA results, both the recent report she had received and the older test Diana had commissioned, that she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Charles glanced at the documents, but did not pick them up. He seemed almost reluctant to touch them, as if acknowledging their physical presence would make them more real. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with decades of unspoken history. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful. He suggested that Kate was being misled, that Diana had been unwell during her final years, and that these documents were likely the product of paranoia rather than fact. He reminded Kate that the press had always been willing to print any scandal about the royal family, true or not, and that giving credence to such materials would only cause unnecessary pain. But Kate refused to be dismissed so easily. She had anticipated this response and came prepared. She read aloud from Diana's letters, quoting specific passages where Diana described meetings and conversations in precise detail. She presented the photographs, pointing out the unmistakable resemblance between the man in the pictures and Prince Harry. She laid out the timeline of events, showing how Diana's discoveries coincided with the most difficult period of her marriage and her eventual separation from Charles. With each piece of evidence, Kate's voice grew stronger, more insistent. Charles listened with growing discomfort. His composure began to crack, small fissures appearing in the carefully maintained facade. He shifted in his seat, looked away from the documents, and finally let out a long, weary sigh. When he spoke again, the defensive tone was gone, replaced by something closer to resignation. Yes, he admitted. The man in the photographs was real. Yes, Diana had maintained a relationship with him during the years of their marital breakdown. And yes, there were questions about this man's connection to the family that had never been properly addressed. What shocked Kate most was not the admission itself, but what came next. Charles explained, in a voice drained of emotion, that he had always known. The information had not been hidden from him. In fact, he had been part of the decision to keep it concealed. After Diana's death, when the full extent of her documentation was discovered, a pact had been formed among senior members of the royal household. They had agreed that certain aspects of Diana's life would remain private, that some truths were too damaging to ever be made public. Records had been sealed, files had been destroyed, and anyone who knew the full story had been persuaded or pressured into silence. Charles justified these actions by invoking the stability of the monarchy itself. He spoke about duty and responsibility, about the need to protect the institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. Individual pain, including Diana's suffering, was presented as an unfortunate but necessary sacrifice for the greater good. The crown had to be protected. The line of succession had to remain clear and unquestioned, and any threat to that order had to be neutralized, regardless of the human cost. Kate felt anger rising in her chest as she listened to these justifications. Her voice, when she responded, was sharp with barely controlled fury. She accused Charles of betraying Diana, of allowing her to suffer in isolation, while knowing that her claims were legitimate. She pointed out that Diana had died still fighting to be believed, still struggling against a system that had decided her truth was inconvenient. And for what? To preserve an institution that was built on lies and maintained through the suppression of uncomfortable facts? The argument escalated, voices rising despite the training both had received in maintaining royal composure. Kate challenged everything Charles said, refusing to accept that duty could excuse such cruelty. She spoke about the cost of silence, about how Diana's untreated anguish had affected her sons, about how the conspiracy to hide the truth had poisoned relationships within the family for decades. Charles responded by insisting that Kate did not understand the full picture, that she had not lived through the chaos of Diana's final years, and could not appreciate how close the monarchy had come to collapse. But Kate was not interested in his perspective anymore. She saw herself in Diana's struggle and recognized the same mechanisms of control being applied to her own life. The disagreements she had been having with Charles about her public role suddenly made sense in a new and disturbing way. He had been trying to manage her, to keep her confined within acceptable boundaries, because he feared what might happen if she too began asking dangerous questions. The realization left her feeling hollow and betrayed. She had spent years trying to be a dutiful member of the family, adapting to their expectations and subordinating her own instincts to the demands of the institution. And all along, that institution had been built on foundations far more corrupt than she had imagined. As their confrontation continued, Kate made a decision. She told Charles that she could no longer be complicit in the cover-up, that Diana deserved better than to have her final truth die with her. Charles responded with warnings about the consequences of going public, about how such revelations would not just damage the monarchy, but would destroy Kate's own position within it. He reminded her of her children, of how any scandal would affect them, of the responsibility she bore as their mother to protect them from unnecessary turmoil. But before Kate could respond to these warnings, another voice entered the conversation. Camilla had been listening from an adjoining room, and now she stepped through the doorway with the calm confidence of someone who had anticipated this moment. Her presence changed the dynamic immediately. Where Charles had been defensive and emotional, Camilla was cool and calculating. She congratulated Kate on her discoveries with a tone that managed to be both complimentary and threatening. She admitted, without apparent shame, that she too had known about Diana's secret for years. What made Camilla's admission truly chilling was her explanation of how she had used that knowledge. She described how she had understood, earlier than most, that information was power within the royal family. By knowing Diana's secret and choosing when and how to reveal or conceal it, she had secured her own position. She had made herself invaluable to Charles and to the institution, someone who could be trusted to prioritize the monarchy's interests above personal sentiment. Her silence had been strategic, calculated to maximum advantage. Now, Camilla explained, she expected Kate to show the same wisdom. She pointed out that revealing the truth would not just expose past mistakes, but would trigger a constitutional crisis. The legitimacy of the succession could be questioned, public faith in the monarchy would be shattered, and the resulting chaos could lead to calls for abolishing the institution entirely. Was Kate prepared to bear responsibility for that outcome? And beyond the institutional consequences, Camilla hinted at more personal repercussions. She suggested that if Kate chose to speak publicly, certain information about Kate's own family background, her past relationships, and private aspects of her marriage to William might find their way into the press. The threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took Kate a moment to fully comprehend what was being said. Camilla was not just warning her to stay silent. She was making clear that speaking out would result in a coordinated campaign to destroy Kate's reputation and credibility. The same machinery that had been used against Diana would be turned against her, and this time, those wielding it had decades more experience in managing scandals and controlling narratives. Kate left that meeting shaken, but not deterred. The threats had been real and substantial, but they had also clarified something for her. This was exactly what Diana had faced. The same choice between truth and self-preservation. The same pressure to value the institution above individual integrity. Diana had fought that battle alone and had ultimately lost. But Kate did not have to be alone. She had something Diana had never possessed. Concrete evidence that could not be easily dismissed, and a husband who had loved his mother and might be willing to honor her memory by acknowledging her final truth. That evening, Kate waited until the children were asleep before approaching William. She found him in his study, working through correspondence as he did most nights. The conversation that followed would test their marriage in ways neither had anticipated. Kate laid out everything she had learned, walking William through the same evidence she had presented to his father. She watched as understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by denial, anger, and finally a grief so profound it seemed to age him before her eyes. William's initial reaction was to reject what he was being told. He argued that it could not be true, that someone was manipulating the evidence to create a scandal. But as Kate patiently walked him through each piece of documentation, each photograph and letter, his resistance crumbled. The memories of his mother came flooding back, moments when she had tried to tell him things he had been too young to understand, conversations that had seemed melodramatic at the time, but now rang with desperate honesty. He remembered her tears, her frustration at not being believed, her isolation within a family that treated her concerns as symptoms of instability rather than legitimate grievances. And then his thoughts turned to Harry, his younger brother with whom he had shared so much, yet understood so little. If what these documents suggested was true, then Harry's entire sense of identity was built on uncertain ground. The anger Harry had expressed over the years, his feeling of never quite belonging, his eventual decision to leave royal life entirely, all of it took on new meaning. William sat with his head in his hands, caught between the brother he loved and the institution he was born to serve. Kate gave him time to process, but she also pressed him not to make the same choices his father had made. She reminded him of Diana's courage, of how she had fought to be heard even when it cost her everything. She asked him not to let his mother's final secret die in silence, not to allow the same forces that had crushed her to continue operating unchallenged. The decision William faced was impossible, a choice between honoring his mother's memory and preserving the stability of the crown he would one day wear. And Kate knew that whatever he decided would determine not just their future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The decision came to Kate in the dark hours before dawn. She had spent the night awake, turning the problem over in her mind from every possible angle. William slept fitfully beside her, exhausted from the emotional weight of their conversation. But Kate could not rest. Every argument for staying silent felt like a betrayal of Diana, and every reason to speak out carried consequences that terrified her. Yet as the first light began to creep through the curtains, she knew what she had to do. The truth, once known, could not be unknown, and keeping it hidden would make her complicit in the same machinery that had destroyed Diana. She made the arrangements herself, bypassing the usual palace communications staff. A small group of carefully selected journalists was contacted, people known for serious reporting rather than sensationalism. She scheduled the gathering for late morning, giving herself just enough time to prepare, but not so much that she might lose her nerve or that palace officials might learn of her plans and intervene. William did not try to stop her, though the pain in his eyes when she told him what she intended was almost unbearable. He understood that she was doing what his mother had never been able to do, and that understanding was enough. The location she chose was significant. Rather than speaking from inside Kensington Palace, Kate arranged to address the press from just outside the gates. She wanted to make clear that this was not an official palace statement, not another carefully managed public appearance. This was personal, a woman speaking her own truth regardless of institutional approval. When she arrived that morning, dressed simply and without the usual trappings of royal presentation, a small crowd had already gathered. Word had spread that something unusual was happening, and photographers jostled for position alongside the invited journalists. Kate stepped up to the microphone that had been set up, and the crowd immediately fell silent. She looked out at the cameras and faces before her, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she continued. She spoke about Diana not as a distant historical figure or a fairy tale princess, but as a real woman who had loved her sons, who had struggled within an impossible situation, and who had tried desperately to tell a truth that no one wanted to hear. She described finding the DNA report, explained her journey to Althorp and what she had discovered there in Diana's hidden archive. She spoke about the letters Diana had written, the photographs she had preserved, and the evidence she had gathered of a son whose existence had been systematically denied. Kate's hands shook as she held up copies of the documentation, making clear that this was not speculation or rumor, but verifiable fact. The cameras captured every moment, every tear that streaked down her face, every pause as she struggled to maintain her composure. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the implications of what Kate was saying became clear. Journalists began frantically typing on their phones and laptops, sending the news out to their organizations, even as Kate continued speaking. Within minutes, headlines were flashing across news websites around the world. The story dominated every channel, every platform, as people struggled to process what they were hearing. Kate finished her statement by making a direct appeal. She called for Diana's son to be acknowledged, for his story to be heard, and for the royal family to finally tell the truth about what had been hidden for so long. Then, as the questions from reporters began to fly, she stepped back from the microphone. William emerged from the crowd and wrapped his arms around her as she collapsed against him, both of them crying openly. The cameras captured that moment too. The future king and his wife united in grief and defiance. The public response was deeply divided. Many praised Kate for her courage, calling her a truth teller who had finally given Diana the vindication she deserved. But others criticized Kate harshly, accusing her of betraying her family and damaging an institution that represented stability and continuity. As the initial shock began to fade, attention turned to the central question that Kate's revelation had raised. If Diana truly had another son, where was he? The answer came 2 days later when a man stepped forward to confirm his identity. He arranged his own press appearance, and when he took the podium, the resemblance that Kate had noted in the photographs was striking. He had Diana's eyes, her expressive features, and a presence that commanded attention. He confirmed that he was Diana's son, that she had known about him and had tried to protect him by keeping his existence hidden. The monarchy faced its greatest crisis in generations, not from external threats, but from the truth about its own past. And at the center stood Kate, the woman who had chosen integrity over safety, who had decided that some truths were too important to remain hidden no matter the cost.